I want to come to the progress that the Russian army is making in Donbass. Do you think that Mr. Putin is waiting to capture the entire of the Donbass because they are yet to capture some areas in Donetsk to enter potential peace negotiations?
No, there will be no peace negotiations. Certainly, yes, Russia has to take all of the Donbass. I expect the Donbass to be fully liberated by the end of next summer, right? No later than that.
Some commentators in the West still claim that Ukraine can join NATO. But according to me, if I'm not wrong, the NATO charter states that countries with active territorial conflicts cannot join NATO, right?
It does, but the truth is that NATO's conditions for joining have been violated before, and they could be violated again.
I want to come to the progress that the Russian army is making in Donbass. Do you think that Mr. Putin is waiting to capture the entire of the Donbass because they are yet to capture some areas in Donetsk to enter potential peace negotiations?
No, there will be no peace negotiations. Certainly, yes, Russia has to take all of the Donbass. As far as the Russian constitution is concerned, and as far as the people of Donbass are concerned, and the people of Kherson and Zaporozhye, they're part of Russia. So I expect the Donbass to be fully liberated by the end of next summer, right? No later than that. Possibly earlier, but that's a time frame. They will probably already be moving then on the Dnieper and Zaporozhye city. They'll have to retake Kherson city probably in a contested Dnieper crossing, which will be easier by that time because the Kiev regime's military will be ground down even further. One of the things about Pokrovsk is it's not only important as the logistics and supply for the Kiev regime's forces north, which is the last remaining defensive arc in Donbass, the Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, Konstantinovka line, and south in Ugledar, which is Russia is already launching a new offensive against right now. But also west of Pokrovsk, there's nothing, baby. It's steppe all the way to the Dnieper River, right? Completely different terrain than the Donbass. Flat, practically zero settlements, none of this urban agglomeration, no factories, no coal mines, nothing. It's straight to the Dnieper River. There's nothing there. That is operational space that Russia can do so many things with then. And they will, but the priority for the moment is the Donbass. However, the Donbass will not end this. I think the Kursk incursion, the Western playing the game of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil as the Kiev regime attacks nuclear power plants. All of these things. The treachery of the Minsk agreements, of this Istanbul tentative peace agreement, all of these things, there's no one trustworthy to negotiate with on the Western side in this. They certainly don't trust Zelensky. They don't even believe he has political legitimacy or that the regime does at all. And it just in geopolitical terms, they don't believe that anyone in the West that they can sign anything with that would actually mean anything. So I think they're slowly coming grudgingly to the acknowledgement that ultimately this war will at some degree end with the regime change in Kiev, but even that won't end it. They will almost certainly have to occupy all of Ukraine. Will they absorb all of Ukraine? No, probably not. But they will certainly remove the regime that is in there and attempt in some Ukrainian rump state to put in place a government that is at least a neutral and guaranteed, not to rebuild their military. Essentially the demands they had at the beginning of the conflict of a demilitarized, denazified. I don't like that term, debanderized, because it's a specific Banderite fascist homegrown West Ukrainian ideology. But that could be years in the future. I don't expect this conflict to end anytime soon. I'll be perfectly honest about that. I know there's some Russian military analysts like, it'll all be over in 2 months. Well, they've been saying it'll all be over in 2 months since the beginning of the conflict. I said it will be a forever war, more at some degree or not, whether a guerrilla war or something else. And I still believe that. And I don't believe that there is going to be any peace negotiation between either Moscow and Kiev or between Moscow and Washington or Brussels, that agreements are signed. There will be no new Tehran conference, right? This war will almost certainly end like the Syrian conflict did. And how did the Syrian conflict end? It didn't. It's still frozen, right? It's still a three-way Mexican standoff with the Syrian government, Russia, and Iran. The Americans with their Kurdish proxies sitting in the east on the oil fields and the wheat fields, and Erdogan camped out in North Syria with 100,000 jihadis still under arms, right? That's unfortunately what Ukraine's future is going to be. I believe John Mearsheimer is actually excellent on this conflict. I mean, I'm a bit of a realist myself, so I have respect for the old man, and you should follow what he is saying on this conflict, because I believe you will find that it echoes practically everything I'm saying. I don't know whether that's a feather in my cap that I'm saying that or not, but he has said that it will be a Russian victory, but I like his turn of phrase. It will be an ugly victory. And that's what it will be, right? I mean, this is going to be a long, hard, bloody slog. And we will be very, very lucky at the end of this if NATO doesn't decide that they have to directly intervene at some point. Obviously, with the political crisis in the West, with the election in the U.S., the recent election in France, the collapsing German unpopular government, there's no appetite for direct intervention at the moment. However, when Russian forces move past the Donbass, when they start moving on Kharkov or even Kiev or Odessa, then we may be in a very different situation, right? It will be a year or two into the future, most likely. We'll have different political realities, whatever they are. And even if there isn't a public appetite for it, that doesn't mean anything, right? False flags are really easy to conjure. And this isn't a conspiracy theory. The U.S. history of military conflicts, whether we're talking the explosion of the Maine in the Spanish-American War, the Gulf of Tonkin with Vietnam, weapons of mass destruction with Iraq, genocide in Libya, false flags is the way that the United States does military conflict. It is the way they spin their population and get a surge of public support to do it time and time again. And they do it successfully every time. Give them credit for that. They have a very tightly controlled political social environment in the United States. I knew that's where I lived for the first 28 years of my life before I immigrated to Russia.
So I have some last questions about the Russian relations with Europe and the West, but ask you one last question about this war. So is Mr. Putin going for Odessa? And I had this doubt because the some commentators in the West still claim that Ukraine can join NATO, but according to me, if I'm not wrong, the NATO charter states that uh, countries with active territorial conflicts cannot join NATO, right? If I'm
It does, but the truth is that NATO's conditions for joining have been violated before,
oh,
and they could be violated again. What is stopping NATO from bringing whatever rump Ukraine in now is then Ukraine would immediately invoke Article 5, and there would be a direct war between NATO and Russia. That is what is stopping them from doing so, not some rules. right? And there are plenty of countries that are willing in NATO that are willing to do that right now. The United Kingdom, Poland, Sweden, the Baltic states, they're all for war with Russia yesterday, right? It is heads in the United States and Germany that are, if no more beneficent, at least a little cooler, that have said no. No, we're not ready. Definitely not yet. Maybe not ever, but we'll see. Not now. That's for sure. They at some level, I am sure they are thinking that if they're going to intervene, well, they're going to make sure that Ukrainians did most of the dying to weaken Russia beforehand for however long they can keep them fighting before they have to make a choice about whether to intervene at some point directly at some point in the future or not. However, that is false, because as has been attested, right, by U.S. Top generals, Cavioli to the U.S. Senate, the Russian military is not getting weaker. The Russian military is getting stronger. They're getting certainly much larger in terms of manpower, right? They're much larger. Their military industrial complex is in overdrive right now in the production of not just artillery shells and missiles, but tanks and aircraft and everything. And they are gaining combat experience, the like of which no one else has right now. This is a conflict with one foot. It started with one foot in the wars of the 20th century, but the other foot is clearly in the wars of the future, the wars of drone warfare and electronic warfare and hypersonic missiles and robotics and artificial intelligence. And Russia is learning real time. The evolution cycle of weapons, right, that Russia and also the Kiev regime for what they can do of it with what underground military industrial complex they have left. Weapons are evolving in cycles of like 2 months, right? And this means that Russia will have by far the most experienced land combat force in the world when this is over, whatever over means. So the idea that Russia might be weaker down the line, I think, is a serious intellectual blunder that at some point they might have to come to terms with and back down. But backing down is really not in their political DNA. So we'll have to see what happens and pray that it all doesn't end, in direct conflict and spirals into a nuclear conflict that, well, none of us will live long as a result of that spiral.
So is Mr. Putin going to go for Odessa as well?
Yeah. Okay. So I first of all, I hate the framing of that question. I have to say, Mr. Putin. All right. It is a feature of Western media to try to reduce a country to one man. Like, this is all about Putin. No, it is not. This is about the Russian government. This is about Russian people. This is about Russia. And large numbers of Ukrainian people who want nothing to do with the regime that seized power in their country in 2014. My family in East Ukraine included, right? Will Russia move on Odessa? That, to some extent, that depends on what happens in this conflict, right? That depends on where things go, what happens in the West, who is elected in the U.S., and what they do, right? Because let's say Donald Trump is elected, that's no guarantee that things will end up well. His first campaign, he campaigned on improving relations with Russia, and then he hired people like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton to run his foreign policy, and ended up with the most anti-Russian, foreign policy up to that point. So a lot of things are in flux, but certainly the Russian government and the Russian people believe that Odessa is a Russian city. It was founded by Catherine the Great, literally. And the population of Odessa is overwhelmingly Russian speaking and Russian leaning. Not 100%, certainly, not even the 70 to 80% in the Donbass, but probably 60 to 70%. And again, I have family in Odessa, distant family, but family. And I've been there and I have some experience there. In strategic terms, the West will almost certainly insist that Odessa remains in Kiev regime hands, right? Let's be frank. NATO wants a naval base in Odessa on the Black Sea. Russia will almost certainly want to prevent that from happening. So most of my nightmare scenarios about the end of this conflict involve around a conflict breaking out over the fate of Odessa. That to me is the U.S. at some level has always been geostrategically laser focused on the Black Sea, and a large part of their intent with this, going back to the overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014, was to push Russia out of the Black Sea, to push them out of Crimea, to push them out. We still see that's very prevalent in kind of the what is the word? The fanfic reality that a lot of British military thinkers and military have been spinning about a Ukrainian victory in the Black Sea, which the UK, the British military, the Navy has been actually very instrumental in planning out and taking an active role in. But I think that's mostly fan fiction, to be perfectly honest. But it's foremost to their thoughts. So Odessa could be, to me, it is going to be one of the most contested end game of this conflict, what happens with Odessa.